tonight.
Of course, Bernie. Thanks for having me, and I hope you're doing well out in Vermont. So, I mean, today, this is, what we're seeing today, and you covered so many of these issues, is what we're seeing today with this Senate GOP bill is just a complete mockery of public service. We're supposed to be here to help people. And what Mitch McConnell and the Republicans in the Senate just presented was just a package of corporate sweeteners to hand a blank check to Trump and Mnuchin that is secret, that we won't even know who they're doling money out to. And then they're just slapping the name coronavirus on top of it. But this bill does not help working families at all. And what we really need to focus on are the core solutions. As you mentioned, going into this mess, the average American, or most Americans have had about, or rather a large plurality of Americans, had less than $400 saved. About 40% of Americans had less than $400 saved for an emergency. Now, all of a sudden, the entire country is experiencing this shock at once with surging unemployment. Today, an official from the St. Louis Fed just announced that we may see up to 30% unemployment rates. At the peak of the Great Depression, we saw 24% unemployment. So this is something unlike anything that we have ever seen. So there are two main things that we need to do economically. One is that we need to get money into the hands of working people. Everyone first of all, and it needs to be universal and unconditional. There are folks that want to apply a means test to make it based on how much money you made in 2018. It's as though these folks have never lived real life, as though we just repeat our salary year after year in the same way, and that every American experiences life like that. And we all know that that's just not true. Just 2 years ago, if someone was going off of my 2018 income, it would be a bartender's income. And we need to realize how much life changes every year for Americans. And so that's one thing. We need to make sure that we're getting money in to everybody immediately. But the second thing we need to do is to stop money out. And we've been able to be successful at some of this in the state of New York. As you may know, Bernie, and for everyone who's tuning in, New York right now is shaping up to be one of the epicenters of this crisis. We are the largest city in the United States, very densely populated. We share public transit and all sorts of things. And we are having thousands of cases pop up throughout the state. And I have several hospitals in my district. I have Elmhurst Hospital. I have Jacobi Medical Center. We have New York Presbyterian nearby. We have Montefiore Hospital. And these are hospitals that serve working people. They serve immigrant populations. They serve working class populations. And basically what coronavirus has done is poured gasoline on every slow rolling crisis that we have been experiencing in the United States and just set it on fire for everyone all at once. So now you have folks who are afraid to go to the hospital because of their documentation status. They're afraid to go to the hospital because they don't know how much the bill will be just for them to go and get treated. And that, of course, exacerbates the situation because people don't want to go in and get a test. They don't want to get, they're afraid of the cost of this treatment if they're uninsured or underinsured. Now you have the entire whole blown through the argument as to why employment should be the reason why you have healthcare or not, or rather why your healthcare status should be conditional based on your employment. And not just whether you have insurance or not, but the quality of care that you get or not, being dependent on your employer. It's wrong. We have long been talking about how healthcare should be treated as a human right in the United States, why we need Medicare for all. And this is one huge case study as to why this is so important. So we have to make sure that we're taking care of people, that we're getting money in, and again, that we're also halting money out. That means mortgage, rent, and debt payments should all be suspended until people can get their feet under them. And we need to make sure that that people aren't continuing to get fleeced or being targeted by predatory lenders as well. And so, right now, because Trump has essentially abdicated leadership of this country to each individual governor, we're currently in this situation where governors are competing for resources, but also that these solutions are kind of chipping away state by state. So what we've been able to accomplish in the state of New York is secure a mortgage moratorium and an eviction and foreclosure moratorium. That's well and good. But if you're going to pass a mortgage moratorium without also passing a rent moratorium, what you are doing is that you are providing relief to people, largely, at least in the city of New York, based on their class, and that you're providing higher relief to people who are landowners or landlords. And so one thing that I'm currently pushing is that I've been calling up Albany and making sure that we push a rent moratorium before April 1st, before the first of the month when everyone's rent checks are due. We're in active conversations about that. I'm hoping that we're able to get this done in the next week because it's going to be extraordinarily important. Student loan debt is another massive amount of money that goes out to people that we also need to halt. And that is something that is totally within our power within the federal government. As most people know, we advocate for cancellation of student loan debt. But even just pressing the pause button is something that you could snap your fingers and do tomorrow if there was political will and if we had a White House that cared about working people. So that is something that we have to make sure that we put the political pressure on. But again, all of these, the reason we are here and the reason this crisis is hitting us so hard is because we have one of the worst healthcare systems in the developed world. We pay less than a living wage to a shamefully large amount of workers in the United States. Paid sick leave is not guaranteed. And we have to make sure that people have basic rights and as well as labor rights. So all of these things are contributing factors as to why this is hitting us so hard. But then you take that economic piece and you layer on inequities of race and immigration status, and you see that how things can get even worse. I represent New York's 14th congressional district, which covers the Bronx and Queens, and it includes Rikers Island. Now, we have been pushing for criminal justice reforms for a very long time and decarceral policy. And one thing that we need to do right now is really hit fast forward on progressive developments and pursuing decarceral policy because people's lives are at risk. There are people in jails right now in situations that are completely destitute and wrong. Right now, there are so many people crammed into certain cells in Rikers, and 21 incarcerated individuals have already tested positive for COVID-19. Those are folks who have been able to get tested. And as we know, tests are very limited. They are rationed for people who are already exhibiting quite extreme symptoms. So we have no idea how much this outbreak is going out. So there are a lot of things that we're asking for. One, we need to provide elderly clemency. There are plenty of people on Rikers that have been 60, 70, 80, 90 years old who quite literally need someone to take care of them, and they are still kept in a cage in Rikers Island and in prisons throughout the United States. We need to ensure that we are granting elderly clemency in the United States. We need to stop unnecessary pretrial detention in the United States. We need to stop arrests for low-level offenses, and quite a few areas have started rolling out some of these reforms. And it's actually a fascinating progressive moment, because what it's shown is that all of these issues have never been about how are you going to pay for it. It's never been about whether we have the capacity to do these things or if the logistics have worked out. All of these excuses that we have been given as to why we cannot treat people humanely have suddenly gone up in smoke. And what has been revealed is that all of these issues were really about a lack of political will and who you deemed worthy to be in an emergency or not. Because to me, In New York City, the highest rates of homelessness since the Great Depression has been an emergency for a very long time. And we have had to have been pushing for housing as a human right for a very long time. Now that we are experiencing everybody who's threatened by the uncertainty of this moment, everyone's realizing, wait, we are all in this together. And so that applies not just to issues of economic prosperity, but it also applies to issues of criminal justice, of civil rights, of human rights. And on the last note, one of the things that I also represent is LaGuardia Airport. And about a week ago, I was called by a community organization, New Sanctuary Coalition, and there was an anonymous tip that there were 6 young children being transported by ICE into New York City in the middle of a coronavirus outbreak. And I had gotten this call on a late Saturday night, and I was asked, can you go to LaGuardia right now? So we hop in, I rush to LaGuardia Airport, and I just took all of my congressional credentials with me, and I just waited outside of the gate where families come out of the airport. And I waited there until I saw an ICE agent with about 6 young children with him. And that's when we started to realize that meanwhile, while the Pentagon has paused all domestic travel for the military, while everyone is working from home, while we were then on the brink of instituting a shelter-in-place policy, you still have ICE that's trafficking children across the country. And not only that, but there are immigrants in detention centers that are getting even less attention because the federal government argues that they are entitled to less human rights than the rest of us. And so as a consequence, there are ICE detainees that are on hunger strikes in New Jersey in several different facilities. You have folks in Rikers who are also starting to organize their own strikes, and that they are not leaving their facilities. They are not going to their labor assignments, which we shouldn't even have mandatory labor assignments where prisoners are paid slave wages. So, we see how all of these issues, social, racial, and economic, are coming to a head, and we can move through this. And if we handle this right, if we handle this with bold, moral leadership, we can move through this and make sure that we abolish these systems of injustice, abolish these systems of class warfare, basically, and we can move to a system that centers people and working class Americans. And, with that, I'm just going to hand it off because that's just our report from New York, and I'm sure that there are a lot of other issues that are being experienced in Minnesota and Michigan as well.
Alexandria, thank you so much. Let's go to Ilhan